dive into the fascinating ancient history of Canada, exploring thousands of years before European contact. This video takes you on a comprehensive journey, covering the Paleo-Indians, their migration to North America across the Bering Land Bridge, and the development of diverse cultures throughout the Archaic and Woodland Periods. Discover how the Inuit, Dene, Iroquois, and Algonquian peoples adapted to the harsh climates of the Arctic, Plains, Pacific Northwest, and Northeast Woodlands, developing complex societies, trade networks, and technologies long before the arrival of Europeans. Learn about the Iroquois Confederacy, the thriving cultures of the Pacific coast, the rise of agricultural societies, and the incredible tools and art that defined the indigenous civilizations of pre-Columbian Canada. Explore key archaeological sites like Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, and delve into the spiritual beliefs, ceremonies, and myths that shaped these ancient cultures. This informative, detailed video provides a deep understanding of how the peoples of ancient Canada not only survived, but thrived in some of the most diverse and challenging environments in the world. Watch now to explore geological formation of Canada, migration of Paleo-Indians to North America, early hunting and gathering societies, rise of agriculture and sedentary villages, the complex societies of the Iroquois Confederacy, Inuit and Dene life in the Arctic and subarctic, art, totem poles, and trade in the Pacific Northwest, spirituality, shamanism, and ancestor worship, Mesoamerican trade networks, and technological innovations. Stay tuned for insights into how these ancient cultures laid the foundation for modern Canadian identity. Unlock the untold stories of Canada's ancient civilizations and their remarkable contributions to human history. Subscribe for more deep dives into world history and culture. Let's explore. The history of Canada stretches back thousands of years, long before European explorers first set foot on its shores. The ancient history of the land we now know as Canada is rich and varied, filled with stories of migration, survival, and the development of complex societies. Understanding the pre-Columbian era of Canada requires a deep dive into the archaeological findings, oral traditions, and anthropological studies that help reconstruct the lives of the indigenous peoples who inhabited the region for millennia. In this exploration of ancient Canada, we will cover geological formation and early inhabitants, Paleo-Indians, and the migration to North America, the Archaic period and development of regional cultures, the Woodland period and the rise of complex societies, the Arctic and subarctic peoples, the Inuit and Dene, the Pacific Northwest, coastal cultures and complex hierarchies, the Plains cultures and bison hunters, the Northeast Woodlands and the Iroquoian and Algonquian peoples, Mesoamerican influence and trade networks, technological and cultural achievements, spirituality, religion, and mythology, pre-Columbian era. Conclusion: the threshold of European contact. Canada's ancient history begins not with people, but with the land itself. The geological formation of North America took place over hundreds of millions of years. The Canadian Shield, the ancient core of the North American continent, is one of the oldest geological formations in the world. It was formed during the Precambrian era, roughly 4.5 billion to 540 million years ago, through volcanic activity and tectonic forces that shaped much of the northern part of the continent. During the last ice age, known as the Pleistocene epoch, which began around 2.6 million years ago and ended approximately 11,700 years ago, much of what is now Canada was covered by massive ice sheets. The Laurentide ice sheet in particular covered most of the land, pushing populations of early human ancestors into more southern regions of the continent. Around 13,000 years ago, the glaciers began to retreat, opening up habitable spaces in what is now Canada. As the climate warmed, plant and animal life flourished, and ancient peoples began migrating into the newly accessible territories. The earliest inhabitants of Canada were part of a broader movement of humans into North America during the late Pleistocene. Archaeologists refer to these first peoples as Paleo-Indians, and their origins are traced to Siberia and Northeast Asia. It is believed that these groups migrated across the Bering Land Bridge, a now submerged landmass that connected Asia to North America during the Ice Age, about 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. The Clovis culture, identified by their distinctive fluted projectile points, represents some of the earliest known human activity in North America, dating back to approximately 13,500 years ago. Clovis people were hunter-gatherers, likely following large game animals such as mammoths and mastodons, which roamed the open tundra. In Canada, evidence of Paleo-Indian presence is found in the form of spear points and tools discovered in locations such as the Yukon, Alberta, and other areas where early hunters pursued the now extinct megafauna. As the climate continued to warm and the megafauna disappeared, these early peoples adapted to the changing environment, leading to the development of more regionally distinct cultures. Following the Paleo-Indian period, the Archaic period, roughly 10,000 to 3,000 years ago, marks a time of significant adaptation and cultural diversification in ancient Canada. As the environment stabilized after the Ice Age, human populations expanded into different ecological niches across the continent. During this period, we see the development of a variety of tools and technologies suited to hunting smaller animals, fishing, and gathering plant foods. For example, in the Great Lakes region, early peoples developed fishing technology using harpoons and nets, while in the interior forests, they relied more on hunting deer, elk, and other forest-dwelling animals. The people of the Archaic period were semi-nomadic, moving with the seasons to exploit different resources. They created tools from stone, bone, and wood, and there is evidence of early trade networks where materials like copper from the Great Lakes region were exchanged over long distances. In coastal regions, such as the Pacific Northwest and the Atlantic shores, fishing played a crucial role in the development of early societies. The maritime resources available in these areas allowed for the establishment of more permanent settlements earlier than in interior regions. Around 3,000 years ago, the Woodland period began, marking a significant shift in the cultural landscape of ancient Canada. This period is characterized by the introduction of agriculture, more permanent settlements, and the development of pottery. The woodland cultures, particularly in eastern Canada and the Great Lakes region, began cultivating crops like maize, beans, and squash. This agricultural revolution allowed for population growth and the formation of larger, more sedentary communities. The introduction of pottery during this period also signifies a major technological advancement. The pottery was used for storing food, which helped people survive through harsher seasons and allowed for more complex social structures to develop. In some areas, such as the St. Lawrence River Valley and southern Ontario, complex societies began to emerge, characterized by large fortified villages and evidence of long-distance trade. These societies, often referred to as Middle Woodland or Hopewellian cultures, were involved in extensive trade networks that connected them to groups as far away as the Gulf Coast and the Great Plains. One of the most distinct cultural groups in ancient Canada is the Inuit, who inhabit the Arctic regions. The Inuit are the descendants of the Thule people, who migrated from Alaska into northern Canada around 1000 AD. The Thule were skilled hunters and navigators, adept at surviving in the harsh conditions of the Arctic tundra. The Inuits' ancestors developed advanced hunting techniques for sea mammals, such as seals, walruses, and whales, which were crucial for their survival. They invented the kayak, a lightweight, maneuverable boat used for hunting, and built igloos and semi-subterranean homes for shelter during the cold winter months. Further south, in the subarctic regions, the Dene and other Athapascan-speaking peoples inhabited the boreal forests. These groups relied on hunting caribou and moose, fishing in the vast network of rivers and lakes, and gathering wild plants. They lived in small, mobile bands and developed rich oral traditions that passed down knowledge of the land and its resources. The Dene and other subarctic peoples lived in relative isolation compared to their southern counterparts, though they still engaged in trade with neighboring groups. Their survival in some of the harshest environments on the planet speaks to their deep understanding of the natural world and their ability to adapt to its challenges. The Pacific Northwest, including the coastal regions of what is now British Columbia, was home to some of the most complex pre-Columbian societies in Canada. The abundant marine resources, especially the annual salmon runs, allowed for the development of large permanent villages with highly stratified social structures. The peoples of the Pacific Northwest, including the Haida, Tlingit, Tsimshian, and Nuu-chah-nulth, built massive longhouses and totem poles that reflected their social status and ancestral heritage. These societies were organized into clans and lineages, with chiefs who held significant power and wealth. Potlatches, elaborate feasts, and ceremonies were a central aspect of life in the Pacific Northwest. These events were used to display wealth, redistribute resources, and solidify social and political alliances. The artistry of the Pacific Northwest peoples is renowned, with intricate carvings, masks, and other ceremonial objects playing a key role in their spiritual and social lives. In the vast plains of what is now Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, ancient peoples developed cultures centered around the hunting of bison. The plains cultures were nomadic, following the herds of bison that provided them with food, clothing, shelter, and tools. The use of the atlatl, a spear-throwing device, and later the bow and arrow, allowed plains hunters to efficiently hunt large game. Communal bison hunts, where large groups would drive herds over cliffs or into enclosures, were common and required extensive cooperation and planning. One of the most famous archaeological sites in Canada is Head Smashed-In Buffalo Jump in Alberta, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where Indigenous peoples drove bison over a cliff for thousands of years. The remains of these hunts provide a glimpse into the sophisticated strategies and social organization of the plains cultures. While bison hunting was the central focus of life on the plains, these groups also gathered plant foods and engaged in trade with neighboring cultures. The introduction of horses by Europeans in the 17th century would later revolutionize plains cultures, but for thousands of years, they relied on foot-based hunting and their deep knowledge of the land. In the densely forested regions of eastern Canada, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast, the Iroquoian and Algonquian peoples developed distinct cultures that would play a crucial role in the history of pre-Columbian Canada. The Iroquoian-speaking peoples, including the Huron, Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Iroquois Confederacy, and others, inhabited the Great Lakes region and southern Ontario. They were primarily agricultural societies, relying on the cultivation of the Three Sisters crops, maize, beans, and squash. The development of agriculture allowed the Iroquoians to establish large permanent settlements with populations that could reach thousands. Iroquoian societies were matrilineal, meaning descent and inheritance were passed through the female line. Women held significant power in both the domestic and political spheres, managing the distribution of food and resources and often selecting the male leaders, or chiefs, of their clans. One of the most remarkable aspects of Iroquoian culture was the formation of confederacies. The most famous of these is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, or Five Nations, which united the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations, later joined by the Tuscarora. The Confederacy was founded around the 12th century, based on principles of peace and cooperation, and is one of the earliest examples of a sophisticated political alliance in North America. The Longhouse was the central architectural structure of Iroquoian life. These large, multi-family dwellings, sometimes stretching over 100 feet long, housed extended families and symbolized the unity of the clans. The Longhouse also became a metaphor for the political organization of the Iroquois Confederacy, with each nation representing a hearth within the shared structure of peace and cooperation. In contrast to the sedentary agricultural lifestyle of the Iroquoians, the Algonquian-speaking peoples of the Northeast Woodlands, including the Mi'kmaq, Algonquin, Ojibwe, and Cree, were primarily hunter-gatherers. These groups inhabited the vast forests and waterways of eastern and central Canada, relying on hunting, fishing, and foraging to sustain their communities. Algonquian peoples were highly mobile, moving seasonally to exploit different resources. During the summer months, they would gather in large groups near rivers and lakes to fish, hunt, and engage in trade. In the winter, they would disperse into smaller family units to hunt game in the forests. Canoes, often made of birch bark, were essential for transportation and trade in the densely forested regions of the Northeast. Socially, Algonquian societies were organized into small bands led by chiefs, though leadership was often fluid and based on consensus rather than hierarchical authority. Spiritual beliefs were deeply connected to the natural world, with a strong emphasis on maintaining balance and harmony with the land and its creatures. The Algonquian peoples were also engaged in extensive trade networks, exchanging furs, tools, and other goods with neighboring groups. These trade routes often connected the Algonquians with more distant cultures, including the Iroquois to the south and the peoples of the Great Plains and Arctic regions. While ancient Canada might seem geographically distant from the advanced civilizations of Mesoamerica, there is evidence that trade networks extended far into what is now Canada, allowing for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. These interactions were not direct, but rather occurred through a series of intermediaries, with goods passing from one culture to another across great distances. For example, copper from the Great Lakes region has been found in archaeological sites as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. Similarly, marine shells from the Atlantic and Pacific coasts have been discovered in interior sites across North America, indicating that long-distance trade routes linked the peoples of ancient Canada with their southern neighbors. One of the most significant influences from Mesoamerica was the spread of maize agriculture. While the cultivation of maize originated in the region that is now Mexico, it gradually spread northward over centuries, reaching the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Valley by around 1000 AD. The adoption of maize farming had a profound impact on the societies of southern Canada, enabling the development of larger, more complex communities and contributing to the rise of powerful confederacies like the Haudenosaunee. Technological and cultural achievements. The indigenous peoples of ancient Canada were not merely surviving in harsh environments, they were thriving, creating sophisticated tools, structures, and artistic traditions that reflected their deep knowledge of the land and its resources. Hunting and fishing technologies. From the invention of the atlatl, or spear thrower, and later the bow and arrow, to the development of specialized fishing gear like weirs, traps, and harpoons, ancient Canadians were experts in extracting resources from their environment. The Inuit, in particular, developed ingenious tools for hunting sea mammals, such as the ulu, a multi-purpose knife, and specialized spears. Shelter and housing indigenous peoples adapted their housing to their environments. The Iroquois longhouse was a symbol of communal living, while the Inuits' igloo and sod houses provided warmth and protection in the frigid Arctic. In the Pacific Northwest, the massive cedar longhouses reflected both the wealth and social organization of coastal societies. Art and symbolism. Art played a central role in the spiritual and social lives of pre-Columbian peoples. Totem poles of the Pacific Northwest are perhaps the most famous examples, with their intricate carvings representing the ancestry and stories of clans. The Inuit were also skilled carvers, creating detailed figures from bone, ivory, and soapstone. In the Northeast, the creation of wampum belts, made from shell beads, served as both a form of record-keeping and as currency in trade. Transportation and trade canoes were a vital form of transportation in the heavily forested and riverine regions of Canada. Birch bark canoes, in particular, were lightweight, durable, and perfectly suited for navigating the many waterways of the Northeast. In the Arctic, the kayak was an equally important innovation for hunting and travel. Spirituality, religion, and mythology. The spiritual beliefs of the indigenous peoples of pre-Columbian Canada were deeply intertwined with their relationship to the natural world. Each group had its own unique cosmology and set of spiritual practices, but many shared common themes of animism, ancestor worship, and a belief in the interconnectedness of all living things. Shamanism. Many indigenous cultures in ancient Canada believed in the power of shamans, individuals who could communicate with the spirit world and serve as healers, guides, and mediators between humans and the supernatural. Shamans played a central role in the religious life of their communities, performing rituals, interpreting dreams, and leading ceremonies to ensure the well-being of the people and the land. Creation myths. Creation stories were a fundamental part of the oral traditions of indigenous peoples, explaining how the world and humanity came into existence. Among the Haudenosaunee, for example, the story of Sky Woman tells of a woman who fell from the sky and created the earth on the back of a turtle. This narrative, and others like it, helped to reinforce the connection between people and the natural world. Ceremonial practices. Ceremonies and rituals were integral to maintaining the balance between humans, nature, and the spirit world. Potlatches in the Pacific Northwest were elaborate feasts that celebrated important events, redistributed wealth, and affirmed social hierarchies. In the Arctic, the Inuit conducted rituals to honor the spirits of the animals they hunted, ensuring the continued success of future hunts. Burial practices and ancestor worship. Burial practices varied widely among different groups, but often involved elaborate ceremonies to honor the dead and ensure their safe passage to the afterlife. In some cultures, such as the Hopewellian peoples of the Great Lakes, mound building was a significant part of their mortuary practices, with large earthen mounds serving as burial sites for important individuals. Pre-Columbian era conclusion, the threshold of European contact. By the time European explorers first arrived on the shores of what is now Canada in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the indigenous peoples of the region had developed complex societies with rich cultural traditions, extensive trade networks, and deep knowledge of their environments. The pre-Columbian era of Canada was not a monolithic time, but rather a period of dynamic change and adaptation. From the Paleo-Indians who followed the herds of mammoths across the tundra to the Iroquois farmers who built fortified villages and formed powerful alliances, the ancient peoples of Canada demonstrated a remarkable ability to thrive in diverse and often challenging environments. The arrival of Europeans would mark the beginning of a new and tumultuous chapter in Canadian history, one characterized by the collision of cultures, the spread of diseases, and the gradual displacement of indigenous peoples. However, the rich legacy of the pre-Columbian era continues to influence modern Canada, with indigenous cultures, traditions, and knowledge playing a vital role in the nation's identity today. The ancient history of Canada, spanning from the first migration of Paleo-Indians across the Bering Land Bridge to the complex societies of the pre-Columbian era, is a story of resilience, innovation, and adaptation. It is a history deeply rooted in the land, shaped by the challenges of climate and geography, and enriched by the cultural diversity of its many indigenous peoples. This long history provides a foundation for understanding the development of modern Canada and the ongoing importance of indigenous cultures in shaping the nation's identity. Through archaeological discoveries, oral histories, and continued research, the story of ancient Canada continues to unfold, revealing new insights into the lives, achievements, and legacies of the peoples who first called this land home. The pre-Columbian era of Canada offers a profound reminder of the rich cultural heritage and deep-rooted connections to the land that shaped the continent long before European arrival. Today, this knowledge helps foster a greater appreciation of indigenous histories and traditions, ensuring that the voices and stories of these ancient civilizations are honored and preserved. In conclusion, the ancient history of Canada to the pre-Columbian era tells a complex and inspiring narrative. From the geological formation of the land to the rise of diverse and complex societies, the indigenous peoples of Canada displayed remarkable ingenuity and adaptability. Their legacies, embedded in their technologies, spiritual practices, and social structures, continue to influence and enrich Canadian culture. Understanding and acknowledging this ancient history is vital not only for appreciating Canada's past, but also for addressing its present and future as the country continues to reconcile its indigenous roots with its modern identity.